This is the International Soccer Preview, and we are Soccerphiles Canada. Welcome to Series 17. We're looking at the squads of the 2023 Gold Cup. This episode is the full-length version for Canada's players. Here we go. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin, and this is Series 17 on the players of the 2023 Gold Cup. This episode covers Canada's players. Just a couple of notes before we begin. This media cast is actually in two parts. One is recorded in May and the other in June. The first is an overview of the candidates for the squad and our guess as to their likelihood in making the final squad. And the second part is going to be added on after the squad lists are released. So this will let you know who among the candidates that we went through actually did make the team. So prior to this, for the World Cup and for other player podcasts, we did two separate podcasts for those two parts, but we're combining them here. And in the previous ones, we gave quite a lot of biographical information. If you want that for Canada's players, we recommend going back to the ones done for the 2022 World Cup finals. So we kind of gave kind of the full history of the players there. But this time we're aiming for a shorter version. So we'll just be focusing on their more recent participation. We will tell you what year they joined the team and the caps that they have. But we won't cover all the tournaments that they've been involved in. So let's take a look at recent games and formations. So we really only have the 3 World Cup games for Canada, and then they played 2 CONCACAF Nations League games in March 2023, finishing out their Nations League season there. So and that's 5 different formations for those 5 games. So they started in the World Cup against Belgium with a 3-4-2-1 formation. So 3 defenders, 6 in the midfield and 1 attacker. But for the second game against Croatia, they went with 4 defenders and 2 attackers. And it's not that different for the game against Morocco. It's a 4-4-1 formation, as opposed to the 4-4-2 formation against Croatia. So 4-4-1-1, basically instead of 2 forwards, it's 1 attacking midfielder and 1 forward. But the important part, probably the 4 defenders there. In the CONCACAF Nations League, I suppose the teams are a little bit easier than the World Cup teams they face. So they went back to 3 defenders. So a 3-4-1-2 against Curacao, which makes sense. Curaçao's a fairly weak team, and this is a very attacking formation. And not that different, actually, at home to Honduras in the next game. It's a 3-5-2 formation. So instead of 1 attacking midfielder, they pulled that midfielder back into a 5-man midfield, but still 3 defenders, 2 attackers for those games. So a bit of mixing and matching there for Canada. Maybe, in my opinion, maybe kind of tinkering a bit too much, but then I do trust John Herdman as a manager, so I'm a bit loath to criticize, and really I don't know well enough to say so. Okay, let's move on to the manager. So we'll start going through the squad, and the manager, I already wrote it there or pasted it in to the video. John Herdman is the manager for Canada. So he has been manager since 2018. He managed the Canadians women's team before that for 7 years, and he's taken them through 3 cups. So ever since the Gold Cup in 2019, all the way through the most recent World Cup in 2022, and he remains their manager. Despite losing all games, we didn't hold that against him, because he's been a wonderful manager for Canada. So we hope that he will stay with us. All right, let's move on to goalkeepers. So we begin with definite candidate Milan Borjan. Milan Borjan is 35 years old, and he's been with Canada since 2011. So he has 74 caps and no goals. He is with Red Star Belgrade in Serbia since 2017. And recently, for the 2021 Gold Cup, he was given time off to recover. And so he didn't play in that cup, but he is basically their starter. He was before that, and he was for their 2022 World Cup, where he started and finished all 3 games. He also started both of their games in March, the CONCACAF Nations League games. That's their most recent game, so we have him as a definite candidate. Probably the second backup keeper, which I'll jump to here, is Maxime Crepeau. But we currently have him as injured. Maxime Crepeau is 29 years old, and he has been with Canada since 2016. 15 caps and 0 goals. A bit of difficulty getting games over Milan Borjan. He's currently with Los Angeles FC in the USA since 2022, and I believe it was in the last game of their season that he made a brave save and got injured. So he wasn't able to make it to the World Cup in 2022. As mentioned, he was the starting keeper for the Gold Cup in 2021. And he still struggles with that injury all the way to now, which is May 2023. So in the second part of the podcast, we may be able to give an update on how he's doing. It was a fractured tibia that he suffered. And so right now he's not the backup keeper, but we'll see next month whether he is recovered. So meanwhile, we have Dane St. Clair as the likely candidate. He's 26 years old. He's been with Canada just since 2021, or at least that's when he got his first cap, and he only has 2 caps here. But he was called up for the 2021 Gold Cup also, so he was the 3rd string keeper there, and also for the 2022 World Cup. So he's been around for a while, and just like those cups, he was called up for the March games, the CONCACAF Nations League games, but was on the bench for both of those. But we think he will be called up and probably be on the bench for this cup as well. A possible candidate is Tom McGill. So Tom McGill is 23 years old, but he has no caps for Canada yet. He plays for Brighton in England and has done so since 2018, although he's been on loan recently to a much smaller club, Crawley Town in England. And he hasn't participated in any cups, but he was called up for the March games, probably because Crepeau was injured. So he didn't start any of those 2 games, but was on the bench for both. So again, probably his participation will come down to whether Maxime Crepeau returns. We have a couple of possible but unlikely candidates, and I'm just going to mention them by name at this point. Unless they're a possible candidate or higher. So we have James Pantemis, Thomas Hassel, and those are possible but unlikely candidates. And then a candidate who seems to be off the squad in Jason Ludweiler. So if those players come back into action, maybe we'll say more about them in the second half of the podcast. When we review these players in June. But we don't want to go into too much detail here. So that's what we have for goalkeepers, and we'll move on to defenders, and we'll start in the central defense. And interestingly, the only candidate we have as a definite there is Scott Kennedy. Scott Kennedy is 26 years old, but he only earned his first cap in 2021. But he has since then 10 caps and 0 goals. He plays for John Regensburg in Germany, not a team I'm very familiar with. I think it's a pretty small team. He's been with them since 2020, and I think they've wanted to use him more. He was selected for the final squad for the 2021 Gold Cup, but was injured before the tournament and also missed the 2022 Gold Cup due to a shoulder injury suffered in early November, so just about a month before the tournament there. So a bit unfortunate, but he has been called up for both of their games in March 2023 for the Nations League games. So again, it seems like they want to use him if he's available. So we have him as a definite candidate, mostly because he was called up for those two games. Next we have a likely candidate, Derek Cornelius. That's already written in the graphic there. And Derek Cornelius is 20, just give me a moment here. Derek Cornelius is 25 years old, and he's been with the team since 2018 and has 17 caps. So he recently moved to Malmo, which is one of the bigger clubs in Sweden. That was in 2023, and he was with the Vancouver Whitecaps for 3 years before that. He was selected for the 2002 World Cup. He hadn't been selected for the 2021 Gold Cup. Didn't make the final cut there, but he was selected for 2022, although he didn't see any action on the bench for that tournament. However, he did start both games in March 2023, and that's why we have him as a likely candidate. Now, you may be wondering where the regular players are back there, and one of them is Stephen Vittoria. So we still have him as a likely candidate. He's a real veteran with the team. He's 36 years old, which is why we kind of think he may be on the way out, because he's getting up there in age. He's been with Canada since 2016, has Stephen Vittoria, and has 39 caps and 4 goals. And he plays for Chaves in Portugal. So he's been involved in most of their in all of their tournaments. No, most of them since 2017. He missed in 2019, and he was a starter for the 2022 World Cup. As far as the recent games, though, he only started one of the 2 games, and he wasn't selected for the others. So it'd be interesting to know why that happened, but it makes us now a bit doubtful. And I would say his age is maybe the biggest doubt about him. But we still have him as a likely candidate. However, the other World Cup defender, central defender, Kamal Miller, we have only as a possible candidate, and I'll tell you why shortly. Kamal Miller is 26 years old, and he's been with Canada just since 2019. But he has become a regular since joining the team with 32 caps, and he's not a goal scorer, just hasn't scored a goal for us. He recently moved to Inter Miami in the USA in 2023, having been with CF Montreal for a couple of years before that. And he was a starter in the 2022 World Cup. However, he was not called up for the March games, for the CONCACAF Nations League games. So we're not sure why that is, but that does move him down to just a possible candidate for us. Also possible is Joel Waterman. Joel Waterman is 20, I'm not sure if he's 27 or 26, but anyway, around 26, and he's new to the Canadian team since 2022, just 2 caps for them and 0 goals. He's with CF Montreal in Canada since 2020, and he was called up for the World Cup squad. He was on the roster, but he saw no action there, and that was the last time he appeared for the team. Our third possible candidate is Kyle Hebert, and he is 25 years old, but he's brand new to the squad since 2023, just 1 cap. So he earned his first appearance on the bench in the first of those CONCACAF Nations League games, and then subbed in for the second game against Honduras. So that accounts for his cap, and that makes him a possible candidate. Moving on to the less likely ones, We have Daniil Henry as possible but unlikely. He last appeared in November 2022, and same with Lucas McNaughton. So the story there is they had a couple of warm-up games before the World Cup, and the second last warm-up game they seemed to use a whole host of players, very, very much maybe players, and a lot of them, that was the last game they played for Canada, so maybe just giving them one more look over before the World Cup there. Okay, well, the next category is the left backs, and we have a likely candidate in Sam Adekugbe. Likely candidate. So Sam Adekugbe is has been on the team since 2015, and I'm just trying to find his age here. He's 28 years old and has 39 caps and 1 goal, and he plays for or he's on the roster of Hatayspor in Turkey since 2021, and I believe Hatayspor is the town that had an earthquake in Turkey, but I don't think he was involved in that because he was on loan to Galatasaray in also in Turkey. But anyway, that's where he is. And even though he didn't play in the 2019 or 2021 Gold Cups, he did come back to the team for the 2022 World Cup. He had actually played in the 2017 Gold Cup. In the World Cup recently, he was just a subbing into 2 games there. And he was also a sub for the March 2023 games there. So Sam Adekugbe seems to be fairly firmly established on the team, but just as a substitute. So we have him as a likely candidate. On the other hand, Raheem Edwards is a possible but unlikely candidate. So we won't go into detail on him unless his name emerges. And same with Christian Gutierrez. Christian Gutierrez last appeared for the national team in March 2022, so we have him as seemingly off the squad. Moving to the right back position, we have a definite candidate in Alistair Johnston. So Alistair Johnston was a starter for the 2021 Gold Cup and the 2022 World Cup, and he actually received a red card in one of the qualification games last year in 2022, but yeah, so he is a definite starter for the team. He actually recently made a move to Celtic in Scotland. He had been with CF Montreal in Canada and with Nashville in the USA in 2020 and 21. So that's a big move for him in 2023, moving to Scotland, and he seems to be very popular there. The next candidate we have is at the possible level, and it is Dominic Zator. And Dominic Zator is 28 years old and still hasn't earned a cap for the national team. He is with a recent move also to a European club, but he is with Korona Kielce in Poland since 2023, having been with York United in Canada before that. So yes, no caps for the national team, and he first appeared on the bench way back in November 2019, and then disappeared, but returned to the bench for both of their recent games in March 2023, the Nations League games. So kind of back in the picture is Dominic Zator. I gotta get my graphics straight. The other candidate we have is Zachary Brault-Guillard. And Zachary Brault-Guillard is a possible but unlikely candidate. Last appeared for the team in just before the World Cup in that warm-up game in November 2022. But he's kind of been in and out of the team for Canada, but is more on the outs here, having not appeared in the 2021 Gold Cup or the 2022 World Cup. So that is it for defenders, and we move on to midfielders. And we start with defensive midfielder Stephen Eustachio. So Stephen Eustachio joined the team in 2019, joined Canada, that is, and he's 26 years old, and he has 30 caps and 3 goals. And he got a big move recently to, well, not recently, last year. He was with Pecos de Ferreira in Portugal, but moved up to the much bigger Porto in Portugal and has been playing Champions League games for them. And as far as Canada goes, he was a starter in the 2021 Gold Cup and in the 2022 World Cup, and also in both of their games in March, the Nations League games. So a definite candidate there. Liam Fraser is a possible candidate, and I think we have two possible candidates here. So Liam Fraser has been with Canada since 2019, and he is 25 years old, and he has 15 caps and 0 goals. So he was with Toronto FC from 2018 to 21, but in 2022 moved to a smallish Belgian team called Danes or Dines. I'm not actually familiar with the team. Well, Liam Fraser was part of the 2021 Gold Cup and the 2022 World Cup, but he was just subbed in for the Gold Cup and didn't see any action in the World Cup. And in fact, that was the last time he appeared for the squad. So not called up in March 2023, and that's why we kind of bumped him down to just a possible candidate. Also, perhaps surprisingly, a possible candidate is Atiba Hutchinson, a real veteran for the team. He's been on Canada's team since 2003, and he's the captain. He's 40 years old. And honestly, that's probably the biggest reason that we consider him just a possible candidate. I personally thought, or I suppose many people thought, he would retire after the World Cup, being 40 years old. But he didn't. He was called up for the games in March, and he subbed into both games. Recently, I think during the World Cup, he earned his Centurion cap. So now he's at 104 caps and has 9 goals in that time. He should have 10. He crashed a header off the crossbar during the World Cup. Oh, it's so painful. Anyway, 1983, and is his birth year, and he's been with Besiktas in Turkey since 2013, so coming up on 10 years with them. So as mentioned, he was involved in Gold Cups all the way, well, not all the way from 2003, actually from 2013 to 17, he was kind of off the team and then made a comeback for the 2019 Gold Cup. But a bit of a talisman there in the World Cup, and apparently is continuing on with that role. Next we have Samuel Piette, and Samuel Piette would probably be a likely candidate here because he's been such a stalwart on the team, but he's currently injured right now with a groin injury, so we'll have to check on the progress of that in June, and that'll be at the end of this podcast. We can in the second half maybe provide an update on that, but Samuel Piette has been with Canada a long time, one of the longest serving players since 2012, and he's 28 years old with 67 caps and has not scored a goal. He's a very defensive-minded midfielder. Samuel Piette's been with Montreal since 2017. He went through the name change from Montreal Impact to CF Montreal, and has been on all the Gold Cup squads since 2013, actually, but we're focusing on recent here. So in 2021 Gold Cup, he was a sub, and in the 2022 World Cup, he was on the roster but saw no action. And as mentioned, he's injured, so wasn't available for the March games in 2023. Okay, moving on to central midfielders. We have a definite candidate in Ismail Kone. So he's increasingly working his way into the squad. He just joined in 2022, and Kone is 20 years old right now. And he recently had a big move himself, like several players we've talked about. He was with Montreal in Canada, but in 2023 moved to Watford in England. He was called up for the 2022 World Cup, where he subbed into all three of their games. And then for the recent games, CONCACAF Nations League games, he started both of those in March 2023. So, as I said, increasingly working his way into the team. We also have as a likely candidate Mark Anthony Kaye. So Mark Anthony Kaye has been with Canada since 2017 and is 28 years old with 41 caps and 2 goals. And he's with Toronto FC in Canada here. In the Gold Cup in 2021, he was a starter, but he's kind of drifted a bit and become more of a substitute. He appeared only in one game of the World Cup where he was actually did start that game, but was subbed out at 60, but otherwise didn't appear in the other 2 games. And I got to say, he didn't play that well in the World Cup. As far as the recent games goes, he didn't start either of those, but he was subbed in for one of them and then on the bench for one other. So kind of currently residing more as a substitute. We nevertheless think he's likely to make the squad. And finally, we have a new name, Victor Loturi, who we have as a possible candidate. Victor Loturi is 22 years old, but he has yet to earn his first cap to Canada. And like so many, he's kind of recently taken a step up in his club form. He was with Cavalry FC in Calgary, Canada. That's not far from where we are here. But in 2022, he moved to Ross County in Scotland. So his first appearance for Canada was on the bench in March 2022, so about a year and a bit ago. Yes, but he didn't play any of the games in March 2023, also on the bench for both of those. So maybe a young player working his way into the team here. Now, this is a good opportunity to talk about the fogginess of the positions that we're using to organize these podcasts. Yes, we did find the best way was to organize it according to position, with the full knowledge that players change their position and don't necessarily won't necessarily show up in that position. Case in point is Alphonso Davies. So we really don't know where to put him in the Canadian podcast. He's a left back for Bayern Munich. That's the club he's with in Germany since 2019. But for Canada, he plays a more attacking role. So we find him anywhere from a winger to the middle of the park, usually at the attacking end for Canada, and sometimes as an out-and-out forward. But he's coded as a left midfielder, and I kind of envision him there, even though he does move around quite a bit. Alphonso Davies is our best player, no doubt. So he made an impression in the 2017 Gold Cup when he was just 17 years old. So now he is 23 years old, or is it 22? 22 years old. He has 40 caps and 13 goals. So in that 2017 World Gold Cup, he won the Golden Boot Award and best young player of the tournament. However, he was I wouldn't say injured for the 2021 Gold Cup. It was more precautionary. He was selected for the final squad, of course, but was decided not to play. So he didn't decide not to play anyway. His team decided, or whoever decided, not to risk playing him, is really what it was about. But of course, we had him for the 2022 Gold Cup, where he started and finished all 3 games and scored the fastest goal of the tournament. And he started both of their games in March 2023. So he is fit and healthy, and we're very happy about that. And we tentatively code him as a left midfielder. Also a bit tentative too is our coding of Junior Hoylett, because he moves around the field quite a bit too. But we've got him as a left midfielder too. He's been on the team for a long time. We have a particular fondness for him because he played for Cardiff in England, where me and my brother grew up in our young years. And then 2021, he moved to Reading in England. That's where he is now. So he's been a part of the team since 2015. And Junior Hoylett is, let me see. I can't find his name. He is 33 years old. Playing for Reading, and he actually was invited to join Canada for the 2011 Gold Cup, but I think at that time he was hoping to get onto the England team, so he never actually joined until 2015 and his first tournament in 2017, and basically a starter, but not always a starter. And in the World Cup, for example, he started games 1 and 3 and subbed into game 2. So that seems to be his role for Canada. But the last appearance he had for Canada was the 2022 World Cup. So I'm a bit worried that he may have retired, and maybe we can update that. I haven't heard anything definitive. But we can maybe update that in the second half of the podcast that will be done about a month later from now. So Junior Hoylett, I put him in the definite category on the graphic, but actually we have him as a possible candidate there. Finally, we have one name as a left midfielder, Matthew Chouanière, and he is... we'll just put his name down because he's a possible but unlikely candidate, actually a fairly new name for me, even though he was on the preliminary squad for the 2021 Gold Cup. He didn't play in the World Cup in 2022, but he did play in that second last warm-up game before the tournament. So he is kind of in and around. We'll talk more about him if he's selected. Moving on to right midfielders, we have David Wotherspoon as a possible candidate. David Wotherspoon has been with Canada since 2018, and he's 33 years old. But in that time, just 11 caps and 1 goal. He was with St. Johnstone in Scotland for a long time, for 10 years. But recently he was released, so now he's unattached. And even though he was with Canada since 2018, his first tournament was the World Cup in 2022. And he was just subbed in for 1 game there, and that is his last appearance for the national team. So a possible candidate, David Wotherspoon. That's the only player we have coded as a right midfielder. So we move on to left wingers, and there we have Jayden Nelson. Jayden Nelson has been with the team since 2020. We have him as a possible candidate here. He has 4 caps and 1 goal, and he plays another player who's actually recently made a move, a step upwards. So he was with Toronto FC in Canada, and he moved to Rosenborg in Norway. And he's 21 years old. 20 years old. So he hasn't had his birthday yet. 20 years old. He was a consideration in 2021 for the Gold Cup, making the preliminary squad, but he neither made that team nor the 2022 World Cup team. And he last appeared for Canada in November 2022. So again, just in a warm-up game before the World Cup. So we have him as a possible candidate, but maybe even a touch lower than that, but not as low as possible, but unlikely, like the next candidate, Jacob Schaffelberg. We do have him as possible, but unlikely. He also last appeared in November 2022, and he plays for Nashville. But we just thought Jaden Nelson might have a better chance, being about 10 years younger, and also making that move to Rosenborg in Norway. Anyway, we'll see in the second half of the podcast how accurate our thinking is. Moving on to right wingers, Tajon Buchanan. He's one of several players they kind of found during the qualification, which was quite interesting, qualification for the 2021 Gold Cup. And Connor and I have been critical on this podcast about how qualification is done in CONCACAF. In this case, I think it was the top 5 teams qualified automatically. And then good teams like Panama and Canada had to go through a qualification. But in fact, they seem to benefit from it because in the case of Canada, this is where we found, or this is where players like Tajon Buchanan and a few good players first appeared, and we kind of seemed to find them through that qualification system. So in the end, we were glad that we had to undergo it, even though it was a little bit unfair. For 5 teams to be granted automatic qualification. Okay, I'll get off my little podium here and get on with it. So Tajon Buchanan has been with Canada since 2021, but in that time he's amassed 31 caps and 4 goals. So he's quickly become a starter. He is just 24 years old, and he also made a move. This was in 2021, so a couple of years ago. He was with New England Revolution, and he earned a move to Club Bruges in Belgium since 2021. So like Stephen Eustáquio, he's played a couple of championship or Champions League games and immediately worked his way in as a starter to Canada, the first tournament in the 2021 Gold Cup and in the 2022 World Cup. As far as the 2 recent games, he started one of them in March 2023 and he subbed into the other, but usually he's a starter. Secondly, also maybe people will find it an odd coding, but Richie Larea, we've coded as a right winger here, but he's another player who's all over the field. Sometimes he's coded as a left back as well. So he's probably second or second behind Sam Adekugbe, or maybe even fairly even with him as a starting left back, but he starts all over the field, so it's hard to say with Richie Larea, but generally a starter. Another one of those players found during the qualification for the, I believe he was found during the qualification for the 2021 Gold Cup, but I do see he's been on the team since 2019, so maybe he joined a little bit earlier. He's 28 years old and he has 39 caps and 1 goal. And he also earned a move to a bigger club. He was with Toronto FC in Canada from 2018 to 21. And then he earned a move to Nottingham Forest in England, who were promoted to the Premier League. I think he moved before they were promoted. And if you know the Premier League, you'll know that Nottingham Forest kind of went mad buying all sorts of players, far too many players. And so Richie Larea didn't really make the cut, and he was loaned back to Toronto. But he's still on their roster, and they survived in the Premier League this time. So we really hope that that he'll play for them in the Premier League next year. Meanwhile, he's playing for Canada in the 2021 Gold Cup and 2022 World Cup, not starting every game, but starting most of them. And similarly, in the recent games, he started one of the 2 and subbed in for the other one. So we have him as a definite candidate, but honestly, he probably won't be the starting right winger, but will start somewhere else on the field. as some of the Canadian players move around. We have just those two candidates as right wingers, coded as right wingers. So we move on to the forward line and first attacking midfielders. So we have just one there, and it's definite candidate Jonathan Osorio. So in my mind, kind of like Samuel Piet, but even more so, a reliable substitute. But he starts more games than Piet does. But I see him kind of as a substitute who's almost certain to come on at around 60 minutes. So Jonathan Osorio has been with Canada since 2013, and he has 63 caps and 8 goals, and he's 30 years old now, and he's really a stalwart of Toronto FC in Canada, actually just passed his 10-year mark with them, and has been with Canada for equally as long. So in terms of recent showings, he was basically a starter in the 2021 Gold Cup, but a substitute in the 2022 World Cup. And in the recent games in March 2023, he started both of those. So still starting for Canada, Jonathan Osorio, a long-serving player for Canada. We don't have any players coded as secondary strikers, but we have a whole bunch of forwards. So probably some of these forwards will play as attacking midfielders. So we begin with two definite candidates, Jonathan David, the first of these. So Jonathan David has been with Canada since 2018, but like Alphonse Davies, he started very young. He got his first cap when he was 18 years old, and he's 23 years old now, with 41 caps and an impressive 24 goals. So that's over 50%. And he's playing for Lille in France since 2020. So for Canada, he's been with us since the 2019 Gold Cup. He actually didn't appear or wasn't selected for the 2021 Gold Cup. And kind of like Alphonse Davies there, he wasn't badly injured. It was just kind of a prudent decision to not have him play. As far as Canada goes, they thought the World Cup qualifiers were a bigger priority, so they wanted him to be healthy for that. He did, though, start the first two games in the World Cup 2022, but he didn't. The third game, he was subbed in to that one. In the recent games, CONCACAF Nations League games, he started both of those, though, and I do see him as a starter, though perhaps not every game. Also, as a definite candidate, we have Kyle Larin. So Kyle Larin has been with the team for a long time, since 2014, and he has 60 caps and 28 goals, so just under 50%. And Kyle Larin is 28 years old, and together with Tejan Buchanan, he plays for Club Bruges in Belgium since 2022, but he was loaned to Real Valladolid in Spain in 2023 there. So Kyle Larin actually got off to a bit of a slow start with Canada. There was a lot of kind of promise about his name and stuff, and he didn't really deliver. But he started to come into form for Canada around the 2019, or definitely the 2020-21 Gold Cup. And in the recent World Cup, he was a substitute for game one, but he gained a starting position for the following two games. And also in the recent CONCACAF Nations League games in March, he was a starter in both of those. So we have Kyle Larin as a definite candidate. We have 5 candidates for at the possible level. Canada never so blessed with forwards as they are now. And we'll start with the most familiar name, Lucas Cavallini. Oh, Lucas Cavallini has been with Canada since 2012, and he's 30 years old now. And he has 36 caps and 16 goals, so not too far under 50% himself. He's with Tijuana in Mexico. That's a recent move. Although he had played in Mexico in the past. But he moved to Tijuana from Vancouver Whitecaps, where he was for a couple of years. And Lucas Cavallini has been, even though 2012 was his first cap, his first tournament was the Gold Cup in 2017, and he's been in all of the tournaments since. In the 2022 World Cup, he only appeared in one game as a substitute there, and actually that is his last appearance for the national team. So not called up for the CONCACAF Nations League games in March, and that's why we have him just as a possible candidate here. Another possible candidate, Io Akinola. Io Akinola is 23 years old, and he's been with Canada since 2021 and has 4 caps. He actually has 1 cap with the USA. That was a friendly, so he was able to move. He's with Toronto FC in Canada since 2018, and his first tournament was the 2021 Gold Cup. However, he wasn't selected for the 2022 World Cup, but that's because of injury. That was because of a cruciate ligament injury. So it's hard to say. I think he was one of the players kind of on the edge of being selected had he been healthy. So it's hard to say if he would have made the squad. But he returned from his injury, but he didn't appear in the March 2023 game. So as I mentioned, for me, it's a bit... he's a bit on the fringes of the squad here, so we have him as a possible candidate. Our third of 5 possible candidate is Charles Andreas Brim, and Charles Andreas Brim is 24 years old, and he's been with Canada just since 2022, but has earned 8 caps and 1 goal in that time. So he's never made it to a tournament. Never selected for a tournament. He was on the preliminary squad for the 2021 Gold Cup, and but in the recent games he was subbed in for one of the games and on the bench for the other. So he is kind of in and around. We have him as a possible candidate. That is Charles Andreas Brim. The fourth one is Liam Millar. So Liam Millar has been with Canada since 2018, and he has 17 caps and 0 goals. He's 23 years old, and Liam Millar was with Liverpool in England from 2019 to 2021, but he was really mostly loaned out when he was at Liverpool, and in 2021 he moved to Basel in Switzerland. So that's where he is now. And he was part of the 2019 Gold Cup, but didn't make the cup for 2021. But he was selected for the 2022 World Cup. But he only came in as a sub for about 10 minutes in one of the games. And that was his last appearance for Canada. So we have him as a possible candidate. And our last possible candidate is Ike Ugbo. Ike Ugbo has been with Canada since 2021 and has earned 8 caps. He's 24 years old. He is a forward, but he doesn't have any goals for Canada. And he is with Troyes, a respectable club in France, since 2022. And he was with Genk in Belgium before that. I think another Canadian player also played for Genk in Belgium. He was also with Chelsea in England from 2017 to 21, but I don't think he got any caps for Chelsea. So he was selected for the World Cup in 2022, but he was on the roster but saw no action, on the bench for all 3 games. And that was his last appearance for Canada, so not called up for those Nations League games in March. And so Ike Ugbo the last of our 5 possible candidates. And I think I forgot to put one of the players on the graphic, Charles Andreas Brim. So a lot to choose from for Canada there. And we have more candidates yet, but in the possible but unlikely category. And possible but unlikely is Theo Corbeanu. Theo Corbeanu, although he's with Wolverhampton in England, I think he was mostly loaned out to other teams there. And then we have one candidate who seems to be off the team now, even though he's not that old. I think he's just 29 or 30 years old. Tesho Akindele. He hasn't appeared for Canada since the 2021 Gold Cup, which he was on the team for. And Tesho Akindele may have retired from soccer completely, I think, because he last played for Orlando City in 2022. So maybe retired rather than unattached, as I thought when I started talking about him. Okay, and I see I've messed up all of my graphics, so just going to fix that up before I sign off here. And the next time you'll hear me, which will be about 1 second after I stop here, will be in June. It'll be a month later where we're going to go over this squad and see which ones actually made it. So I will see you immediately. All right. Well, welcome back to part 2 of the podcast or the media cast. We are now in June, so the preliminary and final roster has been produced. And I'm just going to summarize what we did in part 1 because we're making a short version of this with just part 2. So in part 1, we made a list of the candidates available to Canada, and we categorized them in terms of likelihood of reaching the squad. So we're going to reproduce that list here, or not reproduce it. We're going to show that list here and then go through the players who made the preliminary and final roster. So it turns out to be a partial B team for Canada. I'm a bit upset about that because I thought with the USA and possibly Mexico sending a B team, that Canada would have a good chance to win it. But there are several reasons that manager John Herdman gave for leaving some of the best players off. Some of the best ones remain, though, and we'll see as we go through. One of the reasons was that some players, even though they were playing in the Nations League finals there a couple of days ago, were carrying injuries in that tournament. So particularly Alphonse Davies, but we'll specify what we know for each player as we go through. Another reason given was that some players are negotiating new contracts, so are off the team in order to do that. And generally, some players need rest. The World Cup was in December this year, thanks for that, FIFA, and need rest, having played a big tournament already, as well as the season. Also, the Gold Cup is every 2 years, so we've seen over the past few years some of the bigger teams sending B team squads to the Gold Cup, so not really a shock. Anyway, Canada produced a 56-man preliminary squad and later cut that to 23 players. So we'll go through the players and see who made it. So, of course, the manager hasn't changed. So John Herdman, we'll view him as reaching the squad. And if you're looking at the graphics, I'm going to highlight the ones who made the final squad in green and the ones who made the preliminary squad in blue. And the ones who didn't make the preliminary squad will just leave the way they were. So let's move on to goalkeepers. And we had Milan Borjan as a definite goalkeeper. So he did make the squad. So one of the kind of starters that was brought to the cup. Likely candidate Dane St. Clair also made the squad. And the possible candidate, Tom McGill, also made the squad. So we had possible but unlikely James Pantimus and Thomas Hassel. Thomas Hassel actually did make the preliminary squad there. James Pantomas did not. And Jason Lutweiler, who seemed to be off the squad, is indeed off the squad. He was not on the preliminary squad. And then we had flagged Maxime Crepeau as an injured candidate. And actually, he did make the preliminary squad there, but he was injured with a fractured tibia there and is obviously not fit to join the squad for the Cup. So Milan Borjan, Dane St. Clair, and Tom McGill, the goalkeepers for the 2023 Gold Cup. Moving on to central defenders, we had Scott Kennedy as a definite candidate. Again, we won't review our thinking behind that, but that's all in part one. And he did make the squad. We had two likely candidates, Derek Cornelius and Stephen Vittoria. So Stephen Vittoria, a starter for the team, did make the squad. Derek Cornelius, just a preliminary squad there, not making the final squad. Moving on to possible candidates. Well, Kamal Miller is a starter, but we had him at the possible level. And but he did make the squad. No surprise, to be honest. Joe Waterman, we had as a these are all likely candidates. Joe Waterman and Kyle Hebert both made the preliminary squad. They were our possible candidates. And we had two possible but unlikely candidates in Daniil Henry and in Lucas McNaughton. And both of them made the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. Also, we have two players who are new added to the squad here. So the first of them is Moise Bombito. So because he's new, I will give a little information on him. He was named to the preliminary squad despite, he actually did appear on the bench for both of the Nations League final games. Didn't start any, but on the bench for both. And he doesn't have any caps then for Canada and is 22 years old and plays for Colorado Rapids in the USA, kind of halfway between their first and second team there, Moise Bombito. And we also have Zach McGraw, who is 26 years old, and he also doesn't have any caps for the squad and was named to the preliminary squad despite never having even appeared on the bench. He is with the Portland Timbers in the United States since 2020. So Moise Bombito and Zach McGraw both named to the final squad. All right, at left back, we had no definite candidates and then one likely candidate in Sam Adekugbe. And Sam Adekugbe has reached the squad. So again, he's not quite a starter for Canada, kind of a sometimes starter, but I'm definitely happy to have him here. No bias, by the way, I'm being completely objective. That's not true. Okay, well, we had one player who seemed to be off the squad in Christian Gutierrez, and he is off the squad, not named to the preliminary squad. And we had one possible but unlikely candidate in Raheem Edwards, and he was named to the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. Over at right back, we have a big loss for Canada in Alistair Johnson. Alistair Johnson was named as one of the players kind of carrying an injury in the Nations League final games there. He also played in the World Cup, so he was just named to the preliminary squad, but sadly not to the final squad. We had a possible candidate with Dominic Zator. Dominic Zator did make the final squad, as did our possible but unlikely candidate, Zachary Brolt-Guillard, making the final squad. He kind of was the backup for Alistair Johnson, at least some of the time. He was in the 2019 Gold Cup, so I think Alistair Johnson missing makes a bit more room for him. For Dominic Zator, although Dominic Zator seems a little ahead of him at this point. Okay, in the midfield, we move on to the midfield and with defensive midfielders. And I'm delighted to say that Stephen Eustachio will be on the squad for the 2023 Gold Cup. And we had two possible candidates with Fraser Liam and Atiba Hutchinson. Both of these players just named to the preliminary squad. I'm a bit surprised about Liam Fraser. Did I say Fraser Liam? Liam Fraser. A bit surprised that he didn't make it, but Atiba Hutchinson had actually announced that the Nations League final game would be his final game. So he was named to the preliminary squad. Probably way ahead of time, just in case. If you're not named to the preliminary squad, you can't be part of the final squad. So just to keep that door open, he was probably named, but he has announced that that was his final game. Meanwhile, we have Samuel Piette, the kind of consistent sub in this position. However, he is injured. We did report that in the first part, out with a groin injury. And that seems to have extended to now, so not selected. He's been part of every Gold Cup since 2013, so I'm a bit sad to be missing him. But Samuel Piette on the injured list. Moving on to central midfielders, Ismail Kone was our definite candidate there, but he only made the preliminary squad, and I didn't hear specifically what reason was given for him not being on the squad. I'm a bit surprised because I think he started the Nations League final games, but he wasn't a starter in the World Cup. I kind of expected him to be here, but no, he is not. Mark Anthony K2, not called up for those Nations League final games, but I kind of expected him to make the squad, especially if some of the starters are missing, but he's not. He's just on the preliminary squad, Mark Anthony K. The one who did make it was our possible candidate, Victor Loturi. So Victor Loturi making it to the final squad there. Very new to Canada. He doesn't have any caps for them. Okay, well, the biggest player on Canada is Alphonso Davies, and many Canadians will know the news that he is not on the squad. He was carrying an injury actually for the last couple of months with Bayern Munich there, so he was just used as a substitute in the first Nations League game there against Panama. Didn't stop him from scoring a goal, but I think it was widely expected that he wouldn't be selected for the squad. However, Junior Hoylett is on the squad, so the veteran will be in the midfield there. We're not really going to get into starters here, but you know, the number of players missing might mean that Junior Hoylett will be a starter. We do have a new player here, and it's Ahmed Ali appointed to the team. Ahmed Ali had never appeared even as a substitute before being named to the preliminary squad. So he has no caps for Canada, and he is with the Vancouver Whitecaps since 2023. Just 22 years old is Ahmed Ali. However, he was listed as injured with a concussion, and I'm not sure how recent that is. A concussion is probably not a very long-term thing. I don't know if it'll affect his participation in this cup, but nevertheless, he is on the roster, Ahmed Ali. Moving over to the right midfield, we have David Wotherspoon. We had him as a possible candidate. In fact, the only player coded as a right midfielder for Canada, and he does make the squad. And on the left wing, also the highest level candidate we had was at the possible level. And Jaden Nelson is who that was, and he did not make the squad. Just on the preliminary squad, David Nelson. Instead, our possible but unlikely candidate, David Schaffelberg, did make the squad. On the right wing is Tajon Buchanan, and sadly he is not part of the squad, named to the preliminary squad, but not for the final squad. And I'm not sure, I didn't hear specifically what the reason was for him. It could have been any of the ones that we gave above, but my brother did tell me that he was also in contract negotiations, so that might be the reason for him, but I didn't get confirmation on that. However, we have Richie Laria, and I'm happy to say that he will be on the squad. Always working hard for Canada is Richie Laria. Larea, I've heard it pronounced, and yes, anyway, Richie Larea. Moving on to the forward section, then we have Jonathan Osorio, the staple for Canada, who will be on the squad. Even though he was part of the World Cup, he was just a substitute there. And actually, if you go back to part one, you'll kind of see a certain logic to here. A lot of the starters are missing. But if they were a substitute or not involved in the World Cup, it seemed to improve their chances. That's why I'm a bit surprised Ismail Kone wasn't selected. Where is my Kyle Larin? Okay, I don't know why I have Kyle Larin as a attacking midfielder here. I'm going to move him to the forward line. We had Kyle Larin as a definite as a forward, along with Jonathan David. So I'll start with Jonathan David. He is a player engaged in contract negotiations, so is not selected for this squad, sadly. And also Kyle Larin, just on the preliminary squad, both of them. So we'll be looking at some new names on the forward line. One of those new names will not be Io Akinola. He was only named to the preliminary squad. But Lucas Cavallini is now probably the starting forward named to the squad. And then most of the other names are kind of players we don't see that much. So we have Liam Miller. All of these were possible, from Lucas Cavallini, Io Akinola, and Liam Miller here, a possible candidate making the squad. And also Charles Andreas Brim, a player whose name I've heard a lot, but actually haven't seen that much. I'll probably see him in this cup because he's on the squad. And our final possible candidate was Ike Ugbo, and he just made the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. We had Theo Corbineau as a possible but unlikely candidate, and he turned out to be named to the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. And finally, we have a new candidate here, somebody just added to the squad in Russell Rowe. It's Jason Russell Rowe. And he also had never been on the bench even for Canada before being named to the preliminary squad. But he's 21 years old and plays for Columbus Crew in the USA, I think sometimes between their first and second team. And he was with Toronto FC before that, but never got above the second team for them. But he is very young, so has time. Okay, and we'll finish up here just by summarizing some of the information. So the biggest news being that Canada has brought a partial B team here, some of their biggest names off the squad, but some of their big names making the squad. And we'll just go over some of the notable non-selections first. So first we have central defender Derek Cornelius. We had considered him a likely candidate. Not a huge surprise there, but he was only named to the preliminary squad and not the final squad. Right back, Alistair Johnson, just named to the preliminary squad. A surprise there, but we heard he was carrying an injury. For defensive midfielders, again, not a huge surprise with Liam Fraser. I did think he would make it. He was at the possible level for us, but didn't make the squad. I thought, especially with the openings of some players not being there, he would make it. And Atiba Hutchinson, but those in the know knew that the Nations League final would be the last game for him. He had said so. In the central midfield, I'm very surprised that Ismail Kone is there, and I didn't hear a specific reason why he wasn't. And Mark Anthony Kaye. So we had Ismail Kone as definite and Mark Anthony Kaye as likely. Both of those only made the preliminary squad. Left midfielder, of course, Alphonso Davies, not making the squad, but he had been carrying an injury. And right winger, our definite candidate, Tajon Buchanan, apparently in contract negotiations. And finally, two forwards who didn't make it, Jonathan David and Kyle Larin. All of these players named to the preliminary squad, but that doesn't mean much. It just meant they wanted to keep them available in case they could come. It's not that they didn't make the cut, as it were. Okay, now we look at a few surprise inclusions. So not many here, actually, for Canada. Right back, Zachary Broguillard. We had him as possible, but unlikely, but he did make the squad. Probably because of the absence of Alistair Johnson there. And then in the midfield, we have a left winger, Jacob Schaffelberg. We had him as possible, but unlikely, but he made it ahead of our possible candidate, Jaden Nelson, who only made the preliminary squad. So a couple of surprise inclusions. Well, the new players that I'm going to go over may be surprise inclusions too. So we have two new central defenders being tried out, and that is Moise Bombito and Zach McGraw. These guys might not actually even get onto the field, but they are on the roster. We have left midfielder Ahmed Ali with a bit of an asterisk beside him because of a concussion kind of injury warning. He might be over that by the time the cup begins, or into the cup anyway. And a new forward in Jacob Russell-Rowe. And we do have a lot of names, and I will only give the names of players who were on the preliminary squad and didn't make the final squad, but fans of Canada might be interested as some of these players may be upcoming. So I was aware of three of these guys in the soccer files. I had information on them, and then 5 or 6 of them were brand new names to me. So first one is forward Daniel Jebison, named to the preliminary squad, all of these guys. Luca Koleosho, a left winger, and right winger Ryan Raposo, all familiar to me. Well, not familiar to me, but names I had heard before. And then several names that came out of the blue, and I'll just name them. Achiel Cambridge, Deandra Kerr, Jaquiel Marshall-Rutti, Aidan Morris, Luca Petroso, Sean Ria, and Jonathan Sirios, all named to the preliminary squad, so we may see them in the future. And finally, an update on injuries. So Maxime Crepeau probably would have been the backup keeper, and he was named to the preliminary squad, but that fractured tibia preventing him from being in this cup. The other one is Samuel Piet, the sturdy midfielder, defensive midfielder, and he is out with a groin injury. And then we mentioned Ahmed Ali, listed as a concussion, but maybe over that during the cup. And that is it. So good luck, Canada team, and we will see you in our next